She was humiliated by her groom in front of town. Then a silent mountain man stepped between them. By the time Wren stepped down from the stagecoach, her gloves were gray with trail dust, and her heart was beating like a scared bird inside her chest. 3 days on the road had taken the shine from everything she owned. Her blue traveling dress was creased from sitting too long. Her small hat had lost one ribbon in the wind somewhere past Fort Laramie. Her boots ached around her feet. But still, she held herself straight when the coach stopped in front of the general store in Mercy Ridge, Wyoming. She had come to marry a man named Walter Pike. A man who had written her 6 letters. A man who had promised a roof, a respectable name, and a fresh start. A man who had told her he wanted a wife with a gentle heart more than a pretty face. Rebecca had read those words until the paper softened at the folds. In a boarding room back in Missouri, with rain tapping against the window and no family left to speak for her, those letters had felt like a hand reaching across the dark. Now Walter stood at the edge of the boardwalk in a gray coat too fine for the muddy street, one hand on his vest, his eyes moving over her from hat to hem. He did not smile. Rebecca's fingers tightened around the handle of her carpetbag. For one small breath, she thought maybe he was only surprised. Maybe travel had made her look more worn than the tintype she had sent. Maybe he would remember his manners once the first shock passed. Then Walter Pike lifted his chin and spoke loud enough for half the street to hear. "You are not the woman I was expecting." The words struck harder because he said them so calmly. The driver looked away. A woman carrying flour stopped near the dry goods window. 2 men outside the barber shop fell silent. Even the boy sweeping dust from the boardwalk slowed his broom. Rebecca felt heat climb her neck. "I am Wren," she said softly. "You have my letters." Walter's mouth pulled into a thin line. Letters can make a woman sound better than she looks. A few people shifted, but no one stepped forward. Rebecca had known hard rooms before. She had known whispers after her father's debts were posted in town. She had known the cold smile of women who counted another woman's poverty as a stain. But this was different. This was the middle of a street, under a wide blue sky, with strangers watching her be measured and found wanting. She kept her face still, because it was the only pride she had left. Walter went on, as if silence had given him permission. "I was told you were neat, pleasant, and young enough for a man to build a household with. I did not send for a woman who looks like she has already carried half a lifetime on her back." Rebecca's hand trembled on the carpetbag. She was 27, not old, not young in the way men wanted when they wrote for brides from faraway towns. She had buried her mother, nursed her father through his last fever, sold off the good chairs, the bedstead, the silver comb, and finally her pride. She had answered Walter's advertisement because there had been nothing else. But none of that belonged to him now. "Then I will not trouble you further," she said. Her voice held, though her throat burned. Walter seemed bothered that she did not beg. His eyes flicked toward the people watching. "Do not make yourself noble. I paid for your passage." "I will repay it." "With what?" That was when a horse stamped somewhere down the street. It was a small sound, but in the silence it carried. A man stepped off the hardware store porch. He was tall, broad through the shoulders, and dressed like the mountain had shaped him instead of any tailor. His brown coat was patched at one sleeve. His beard was dark and rough along his jaw. His hat sat low over eyes the color of storm clouds above pine trees. He moved slowly, but the street seemed to make room before he reached it. Rebecca had never seen him before. Walter had. That much showed in the way his mouth closed. The man crossed the road and stopped between them, not so close to Rebecca that he claimed her, not so close to Walter that he threatened him. He simply stood there, solid as a post driven deep into frozen ground. "That is not how you treat a lady," he said. His voice was low, not loud, not angry. Somehow that made it stronger. Walter gave a short laugh. "This does not concern you, Morgan." "You put it in the street," the man said. "That made it everyone's concern." A faint wind moved along the boardwalk. Dust curled around Rebecca's boots. She could hear her own breathing. Walter's face reddened. "She came here to marry me. I have a right to decide." "You had a right to decide in private," Morgan said. "You chose to shame her in public. Now you are done." Nobody spoke. The boy with the broom stopped sweeping altogether. Walter looked around and saw what Rebecca saw. The town was watching him differently now, not as a disappointed groom, but as a man who had taken pleasure in making a tired woman stand alone. His pride could not bear it. He leaned slightly around Morgan and looked at Rebecca. "You will find no better offer in this town." Rebecca swallowed. For one terrible second, fear pressed against her ribs. He might be right. She had no room paid for, no family nearby, no work promised, and less than $2 in her purse. Then the mountain man's hand reached down. Not for her arm. For her carpet bag. He picked it up like the matter had already been settled. Walter stared. "What do you think you are doing?" Morgan did not look at him. His eyes stayed on Rebecca, and for the first time since she had stepped down from the stagecoach, someone spoke to her as though her answer mattered. "Do you have people here?" Rebecca could have lied. Pride asked her to. Fear nearly begged her to. But she was too tired for lies. "No," she said, "not anymore." The man nodded once. "My name is Elias Morgan. I have a cabin above the North Ridge. There is an empty room. You can stay there until you decide what comes next." Whispers moved along the boardwalk, like dry grass in the wind. Rebecca searched his face for some hidden price. She had learned to look for prices. Men rarely offered help without keeping one hand open behind their backs. But Elias Morgan only stood there, holding her bag, waiting. "Why would you do that?" she asked. His gaze moved briefly to Walter, then back to her. "Because leaving you in this street would make me no better than him." The words were plain, but they settled deep. Walter let out a bitter breath. "You will regret taking in trouble." Elias turned his head just enough to answer. "Then it will be my regret." For a long moment Rebecca could not move. Her whole life had taught her to make herself small when people judged her, to lower her eyes, to explain less, to need less. But this man had stepped in without asking her to become smaller first. She looked down the street, at the strangers pretending not to stare now. She looked at Walter, whose fine coat suddenly seemed like the cheapest thing in town. Then she looked toward the North Ridge, where dark pine trees climbed the slope and the mountains stood blue beyond them. She had come to Mercy Ridge as a bride. Now she was leaving as something else. A woman with no husband, no certain future, and one stranger carrying her only bag. Rebecca lifted her chin. "I can cook," she said, "and sew and keep a house clean." For the first time, something almost like warmth touched Elias Morgan's eyes. "Good," he said. "The roof leaks, the coffee is bad, and I have been eating beans since November." A small laugh rose in Rebecca's chest, but it broke before it became sound. Elias started toward the end of town. After one step he slowed, not enough to make a show of it, just enough for her to walk beside him. Behind them, Walter said nothing. The people of Mercy Ridge watched the rejected bride and the silent mountain man leave the street together. And before Rebecca reached the first bend in the trail, she felt the weight of the whole town's question behind her. Was Elias Morgan saving her from shame? Or had she just walked into a new kind of danger? The answer waited above the ridge, inside a lonely cabin where the rain had already begun to gather in the clouds. The trail to the North Ridge was steeper than Rebecca expected. At first, she walked with her back straight and her chin lifted, because she could still feel the town watching from behind. Every step away from the boardwalk felt like a small refusal to break. But once the last roofline dropped behind the cottonwoods and the road narrowed into a climbing wagon track, the strength she had borrowed from pride began to wear thin. Her boot slipped twice in the loose dirt. Elias Morgan noticed both times. He did not reach for her unless she needed it. He did not fuss. He only shifted the carpetbag to his other hand and slowed his long stride until she could match it without feeling pitied. That quiet mercy nearly undid her. Rebecca looked away toward the valley. Mercy Ridge sat below them, small and bright in the afternoon sun, with its church steeple, its general store, its livery, and all those eyes that had watched a stranger be shamed. From up here, the town looked innocent. Places often did from a distance. "I did not mean to bring talk to your door," she said after a while. Elias kept walking. Talk finds doors whether a person invites it or not. "You know they will say things." "They already do." She glanced at him then. His face gave little away. He had the kind of stillness that came from years spent listening to weather, animals, and trouble before they arrived. There was nothing polished about him. His coat was worn at the cuffs. His boots were scarred. His hands were large, rough, and darkened by work. But he had not looked at her like damaged goods. That mattered more than she wanted it to. "Are you always so willing to be judged?" she asked. "No," he said. "I just stopped being surprised by it." The answer carried a weight she did not understand yet. They walked another few minutes in silence. Pines thickened on both sides of the trail. Somewhere above them a hawk cried, sharp and lonely. The air smelled of sap, dust, and cold stone. Rebecca's chest still hurt, but the clean mountain wind made the hurt easier to carry. At last, a cabin appeared between the trees. It was small but strongly built, set on a shelf of land overlooking the valley. A split-rail fence circled a muddy yard. A bay mare stood in a lean-to, lifting her head when they came through the gate. Beside the cabin was a woodpile stacked with the care of a man who did not like waste. Smoke stains darkened the stone chimney. A water barrel sat near the back wall, and a line of traps hung from pegs under the eaves. Rebecca stopped at the gate. This was not the life Walter Pike had promised in his letters. There was no white house with curtains, no parlor, no respectable place beside a husband who would introduce her at church and make people forget she had arrived with nothing. This was a mountain cabin, above a town that had already begun making stories about her. And somehow it felt less cruel than the street below. Elias opened the door and stepped inside first, as if giving her a moment to decide whether to follow. Rebecca crossed the threshold. The cabin smelled of wood smoke, leather, coffee, and pine. It was cleaner than she expected, plain but not neglected. A table stood near the hearth with two mismatched chairs. A rifle hung high above the door, unloaded and out of reach. Tools lined one wall, each in its proper place. There were no pretty things, but nothing was careless. Elias set her bag beside a small back room. "This room is empty," he said. "Window faces east. It gets morning light." Rebecca stood in the doorway. The room was narrow. A bed sat against one wall, covered with a faded quilt stitched in brown and cream. A washstand stood beneath the window. Someone had scrubbed the floorboards recently. There was a peg for her dress, a small shelf, and nothing else. It was more kindness than Walter Pike had offered her with 6 letters. She turned to Elias. "I can pay you once I find work. You can help with meals till then. That is not equal to room and board." "I did not ask for equal." His tone was not sharp, it was simply final. Rebecca looked down at her gloves. "I do not want charity." At that, Elias was quiet for a moment. The mare shifted outside, and the cabin wood creaked softly as the wind pressed against it. Then do not call it charity, he said. Call it a roof during weather. Rebecca felt her eyes sting and hated herself for it. She bent to open her carpet bag before he could see. I will make supper. There is not much in the larder. I have made supper from less than not much. That almost smile touched his eyes again, then vanished. He showed her where things were kept: flour in a tin that was nearly empty, beans in a sack, salt pork wrapped in cloth, coffee so bitter by smell alone that Rebecca understood his warning from the trail. A few onions hung near the hearth, and there were dried apples in a jar. It is enough, she said. Elias looked doubtful but did not argue. I have traps to check before dark, he told her. Water barrel is outside. Stove draws if the back vent is open. The mare's name is Juniper. She bites if she thinks you are foolish. Rebecca nodded. I will try not to offend her. This time the corner of his mouth moved. Then he took his hat from the peg and left her alone. For several breaths, Rebecca did not move. The cabin seemed larger without him and lonelier too. She listened to his steps cross the yard, heard the mare snort, heard the gate open and close. Only when the sounds faded did she sit on the edge of the little bed. Her body wanted to fold. She pressed both hands over her mouth and fought it. She would not cry because of Walter Pike. Not here, not in a stranger's cabin, not with flour to measure, a fire to tend, and a future hanging by a thread. But the tears came anyway. Not loud, not dramatic, just 2 hot tracks down her dusty face while she sat straight-backed on a bed that was not hers, in a room she had not earned, under a roof offered by a man she did not know. She wiped them away with the heel of her hand. Then she stood. By the time Elias returned, the cabin smelled of onion, salt pork, beans, and dried apples warming in a small skillet. Rebecca had found a dented pot, cleaned it twice, and stretched the food into something that looked almost generous. She had also swept the floor, folded her gloves near the washstand, and set the table with the 2 mismatched plates she found on the shelf. Elias entered with cold on his coat and mud on his boots. He stopped just inside the door. For the first time, Rebecca saw him unsure. Not frightened, not confused, just caught by the simple sight of a lit room waiting for him. She looked at the pot instead of his face. Supper is ready. He removed his hat slowly. Smells better than it ought to. That is the onions doing most of the pretending. He washed at the basin and sat across from her. They ate quietly. Elias did not speak much, but he ate like a man who respected food. That pleased her, not because she needed praise, but because careful eating was a kind of honesty. He noticed the work without turning it into a speech. Halfway through the meal, rain began tapping the roof. Rebecca looked up. A thin drop formed in the corner near the back room door. It held for a moment, shining in the lamplight, then fell to the floor. Elias saw it. So did she. Neither of them spoke. A second drop followed. Rebecca rose, found a small kettle with a broken handle, and placed it beneath the leak. Then she returned to the table as though nothing had happened. Elias watched her for a moment. You do not have to pretend not to see what is wrong, he said. Rebecca folded her hands in her lap. I have learned that mentioning what is wrong does not always improve it. Something changed in his face then. Not pity. He did not seem like a man who wasted much time on pity. It was recognition, and that was worse because it felt close to understanding. In this cabin, he said, if something leaks, you can say it leaks. Rebecca looked at the kettle as another drop struck the bottom with a hollow ping. The roof leaks, she said. Yes, Elias answered, it does. That coffee is terrible. He paused. Then he nodded once, that too. This time Rebecca did laugh, only a little, and it shook at the edges, but it was real. Elias looked down at his plate, and for a brief second the cabin did not feel like a rescue or a scandal. It felt like two tired people sitting under a bad roof, telling the truth about small things because the large things were still too painful. After supper, Rebecca washed the dishes. Elias brought in extra wood without being asked. Rain thickened outside until the whole cabin seemed wrapped in sound. The kettle under the leak filled slowly, drop by drop, like a clock counting down to something neither of them could name. When Rebecca finally stepped into the back room, Elias remained by the hearth, sharpening a knife with slow, steady strokes. She paused at the doorway. "Mr. Morgan." He looked up. "Thank you for not asking me to explain today." His hand stilled on the whetstone. "You do not owe your hurt to anyone before you are ready," he said. Rebecca held those words in silence. Then she closed the door. That night rain fell hard over the North Ridge. In the little room, Rebecca lay awake beneath the faded quilt, listening to the leak hit the kettle outside her door and the fire settle low in the hearth. She should have felt afraid. A strange cabin, a strange man, a town below already turning her life into gossip. But what kept her awake was not fear. It was the way Elias Morgan had said, "In this cabin, if something leaks, you can say it leaks." Because for the first time in years, Rebecca wondered what else she might be allowed to say. And outside her window, beyond the rain and the pines, someone on horseback stopped in the dark below the ridge, watching the cabin's lamp burn through the storm. The next morning came pale and cold, with mist hanging low between the pines. Rebecca woke before the sun touched the window. For a few seconds, she did not remember where she was. The ceiling above her was not the cracked plaster of the boarding room in Missouri. The air smelled of ash and rain-soaked cedar. Somewhere beyond the wall, a man moved quietly near the stove, careful not to wake her. Then memory returned. The stagecoach, Walter Pike's voice in the street, Elias Morgan stepping between them, the cabin on the ridge, the leak in the roof, the rider in the dark, though she had not known of that watching shadow yet. Rebecca sat up and folded the quilt with the same care she used when life felt uncertain. A woman could not command much on the frontier, but she could smooth a blanket, tie her hair, and decide not to fall apart before breakfast. When she opened the door, Elias was pulling on his coat. A pot of coffee sat on the stove, dark as river mud. 2 cups stood beside it. Rebecca looked at them. "You made enough for 2, she said. He reached for his hat. "Didn't know how early you rose." That was all, but it warmed something in her chest. She poured the coffee and hid her wince after the first sip. Elias noticed. His eyes flickered toward the cup. "Still terrible. Worse in daylight." He gave the smallest nod. "Fair." She began pulling flour from the tin. "I can make biscuits if you have time." Trap line first, weather shifted in the night. He opened the door, then paused. "There is a loose board on the porch, left side, step wide." "I will." He left before the first biscuit was mixed. Rebecca stood alone in the cabin, listening to his boots fade across the yard. The quiet that followed did not feel empty. It felt watchful, like the cabin was waiting to learn whether she belonged in it. She worked because work had always steadied her. By full light, she had swept the ash from the hearth, strained the coffee grounds through cloth to soften the bitterness, and turned the remaining beans into a thicker breakfast stew. She found the roof leak had slowed, though the kettle beneath it still held last night's rain. She emptied it outside and stood for a moment at the edge of the porch. Below the ridge, Mercy Ridge was waking. Smoke lifted from chimneys. A wagon moved along the main road. The church bell rang once, not for service, only to mark the hour. The town looked peaceful from above, as if no cruel thing had happened there yesterday. Juniper, the bay mare, watched Rebecca from the lean-to with one dark eye. "I have been warned about you," Rebecca said. The mare chewed hay and looked unimpressed. Rebecca almost smiled. She carried peelings from the small onion basket and set them near the fence. Juniper stretched her neck, sniffed them, and accepted the offering like a queen receiving tribute. When Rebecca turned to go back inside, she saw marks in the wet dirt near the lower fence. Hoof prints. Fresh ones. Not Elias, unless he had ridden down in the night and returned without her hearing. These tracks stopped near the trees below the cabin, then turned back toward the valley. Rebecca stared at them until a coldness moved through her that had nothing to do with the morning air. Someone had been there. She told herself it could have been a hunter, a traveler, a ranch hand cutting across the ridge. But deep down she thought of Walter Pike. When Elias returned near mid-morning, he carried 2 rabbits and a coil of damp rope over one shoulder. Mud marked his boots to the ankle. He stopped when he saw Rebecca standing near the fence. "What is it?" She pointed. Someone came up close in the night. Elias crouched by the prints. He did not speak at first. He studied the depth, the direction, the broken grass near the trees. His face became still in a way that made the yard feel colder. "Single rider," he said, "came no closer than the pines." "Do you think it was him?" Elias looked toward town. He did not ask who she meant. "Could be." Rebecca wrapped her shawl tighter around herself. Why would he come here? Some men leave a thing and still hate seeing it stand without them. The words settled between them. Rebecca turned toward the cabin. She wanted to say she was not afraid of Walter. She wanted to say yesterday had ended the matter. But the truth was sitting too heavy in her throat. Elias rose. "If he comes to the door, you do not answer it alone. I will not hide behind you. I am not asking you to hide." His voice stayed low. "I am asking you not to stand in a storm just to prove rain is wet." She looked at him then. No man had ever spoken to her fear without making it sound like weakness. Elias made it sound like weather, something real to be respected. Rebecca nodded once, "All right." That afternoon she made rabbit stew with onions and dried apples. While it cooked, Elias took tools from the wall and worked outside on the porch board he had warned her about. His movements were steady and unshowy. He pulled the damaged plank, measured another, cut it clean, and set it in place. Rebecca watched through the window more than once. It was not the repair itself that held her attention. It was the way he made the world safer without announcing he had done so. First the street, then the room, then the loose board. A man could tell a woman she mattered with flowers and fine words, or he could remember where she might fall. By late afternoon, clouds opened and let sunlight through. The wet yard shone. Rebecca stepped outside with a basket of damp cloths she had washed and wrung by hand. She pinned them along a line near the cabin wall. Elias was splitting wood near the shed. After a long while he said, "Town will need supplies by Thursday. If you want thread or anything else, I can bring it." Rebecca fastened a clothespin. "I should go myself." His axe paused. "I am not ashamed to be seen," she added softer. Elias set another log upright. "I did not think you were." "Others might. Others think too much for people who do too little." That almost made her laugh. The wind moved the sheets between them. For a moment she could see him only in pieces through the white cloth, a shoulder, a hat brim, a strong hand reaching for another log. "Did they judge you too?" she asked. The axe came down clean and hard. For a few seconds he said nothing. Then he leaned the axe against the block. "Years ago." Rebecca waited but did not push. Elias looked out toward the valley. "My wife died on this ridge." The cloth in Rebecca's hand slipped. "I'm sorry," she whispered. He nodded once, as if he had accepted those words many times and still did not know where to put them. "She took fever in late winter, Snow cut the trail. Doctor could not get through. His jaw worked slightly. Town decided a man living this far from help had killed her by stubbornness. Rebecca's chest tightened. "Did you?" His eyes came back to hers. It was a bold question, maybe too bold, but after Walter's public cruelty and the hoofprints in the mud, she had no patience left for soft lies. "No," Elias said, "but I have asked myself enough times to know the question by heart." The wind snapped one sheet on the line. Rebecca thought of the careful cabin, the tools in order, the repaired porch board, the 2 cups by the stove. This was not just a lonely man's home. It was a place built around a grief he had never fully set down. "I know what it is to be blamed for what you could not save," she said. Elias studied her, but this time he did not ask. Maybe that was why she told him more. "My father owed money when he died. People said I should have managed him better, as if a daughter can put a rope around a grown man's choices and lead them where she pleases." She looked down at the wet cloth twisted between her fingers. "After that, every room I entered seemed to remember his debts before it remembered my name." Elias said nothing, but his silence made space instead of taking it. That evening they ate rabbit stew while the sky burned pink over the ridge. Elias took a second helping, which Rebecca was beginning to understand as high praise. She did not mention it. He did not explain it. After supper, a knock came at the door. 3 firm taps. Rebecca froze with a plate in her hand. Elias rose slowly. The cabin seemed to hold its breath. He opened the door only halfway. A woman stood on the porch in a dark green dress, her bonnet strings tied tight beneath her chin. She was small, straight-backed and sharp-eyed, with a basket hanging from one arm. "Evening, Mr. Morgan," she said. "I came to see the woman folks are talking about." Elias did not move. That is a poor reason to climb a ridge. The woman's mouth twitched. "Then I also brought bread." Rebecca stepped forward before the moment could turn awkward. "I am Rebecca Wren." The woman looked at her for a long second, not unkindly, but with the searching gaze of someone deciding whether gossip had lied. "Edith Bell," she said. "I teach the younger children at the schoolhouse. May I come in?" Elias looked at Rebecca. The choice was hers. That small act did more for her dignity than any speech could have. Rebecca set the plate down. "Yes, Mrs. Bell, please do." Edith entered and placed the bread on the table. Her eyes moved around the cabin, noting the swept floor, the simmering kettle, the folded cloths near the hearth, and Rebecca's sewing basket by the chair. "You keep a neat room," Edith said. "I try. We need help at the school 2 mornings a week, children between 6 and 9, reading sums, keeping Tommy Wilkes from putting chalk in his ears." Edith removed her gloves. "I heard you were educated." Rebecca blinked. "Who told you that?" "Your letters did." The cabin went still. Rebecca's breath caught. "My letters." Edith reached into her basket and drew out an envelope, damp at one corner but still sealed with a cracked bit of red wax. "This was found behind the post office counter after Mr. Pike left yesterday," she said. "Addressed to him. In your hand, I believe." Rebecca took it slowly. It was the last letter she had written before leaving Missouri. The one where she had told Walter the truth about her father's debts, her age, her lack of dowry, and her fear that honesty might cost her the match. Walter had never answered that letter. Rebecca looked up, her face pale. Edith's voice softened. "Seems to me the man knew exactly who was stepping off that coach." Elias turned his eyes toward the dark window. Outside, far below the ridge, a horse moved through the trees and vanished before anyone could see its rider clearly. And Rebecca realized Walter Pike had not humiliated her because he was surprised. He had humiliated her because he had planned to. The letter lay on Elias Morgan's table like a small, quiet witness. Rebecca did not sit at first. She stood with the envelope in both hands while the fire moved softly behind the stove door, and Edith Bell watched her with careful eyes. Outside, the last light had gone behind the ridge, leaving the cabin windows dark enough to reflect the room back at them. Her own face looked strange in the glass. Paler, sharper, less like the woman who had stepped off the coach hoping for a new life, and more like someone who had just found the knife after feeling the wound. Elias stood near the door, one hand resting on the latch. He had not spoken since Edith said Walter knew exactly who was coming. That silence was not empty. It felt like a storm waiting for direction. Rebecca broke the seal. Her fingers trembled once, then steadied. She knew every word before she read it because she had written them in a boarding room by weak lamplight, trying to be brave enough to tell the truth before she traveled across half a territory to marry a stranger. Dear Mr. Pike, before I come, there are things you must know, because I cannot build a life on a false picture. She swallowed hard. Edith looked down at her gloves, giving Rebecca privacy without leaving the room. Rebecca read on in silence. She had told Walter that she was 27, that the tintype she had sent was 2 years old because it was the only one she owned, that her father had died owing money but the debt was not hers by law though shame had followed her all the same, that she had no dowry, only the skills of her hands, cooking, sewing, reading, keeping accounts, making a home from little when little was all there was. At the end, she had written one line that now felt almost foolish. If these truths change your mind, I would rather know before I arrive than be unwanted after I come. Rebecca lowered the letter. The room blurred, but she did not cry. Not this time. He had this, she said, before I ever left Missouri. Edith nodded. Postmaster found it slipped behind the sorting shelf, but the wax was broken when it was found. Rebecca looked up. Elias' jaw tightened. So he opened it, Rebecca said. Yes, Edith answered, and when no reply came, I suppose you thought he accepted your honesty. Rebecca's mouth pulled into something that was not a smile. I thought silence meant mercy. Elias turned from the door. With men like Pike, silence is often just a place to hide a plan. The words were hard but not unkind. Rebecca folded the letter carefully because she needed her hands to do something proper while her heart made sense of improper things. He paid my passage, she said. He let me come all that way knowing he meant to shame me. Edith's face softened. Some people enjoy being cruel only when they have an audience. The stove popped. Rebecca looked at the floorboards. A thin line of mud had dried near Elias' boots. Her own hem was still stained from the road. She thought of the street, of Walter's voice carrying, of his complaint about the picture, the letters, the expectations. It had not been disappointment. It had been performance. He had wanted the town to see him reject her before anyone could ask why he had sent for a bride with no dowry. But why? That question sat cold in Rebecca's stomach. Edith seemed to read it there. There is something else, the teacher said. Elias looked at her. Say it plain. Edith drew in a breath. Walter Pike has been trying to buy land along Willow Creek. Small places, widow claims, old homesteads, anything with water access. Rebecca frowned. What does that have to do with me? Your father was Silas Wren. Rebecca stiffened. Yes. Edith opened her basket again and pulled out a folded notice, worn at the corners. Then you may want to see this. Rebecca took it. It was a copy of an old land filing from Cottonwood County, Nebraska, tied to a parcel near Willow Creek. Her father's name was printed in faded ink. Silas Wren. Her breath caught. No, she whispered. My father lost everything. Maybe not everything, Edith said. My brother works records in Cheyenne. He sent this when Walter began asking questions about Wren land. I did not connect your name until you arrived." Rebecca stared at the paper. She knew of Willow Creek only from childhood scraps. Her mother had once spoken of a small claim with cottonwoods by the water, land Silas meant to sell before debt swallowed him. Later, he told them it was gone, sold for taxes, lost like the rest. "What is it worth?" Elias asked. Edith's eyes shifted toward him. Enough that a man might want a wife's signature, enough that he might not want the town asking why he sent for her. Rebecca understood then. The room seemed to tilt. Walter had not wanted her heart, he had wanted her name. He had needed her close enough to marry, or at least close enough to pressure, but once he read her honest letter, he knew she was not the timid girl he had imagined. She had written the truth. She had asked for a clear answer. Maybe that had warned him she would not sign papers blindly. So he chose another way. Shame her in public, make her desperate, make her believe no decent man would have her, then come later with a softer voice and a second offer, dressed as mercy. Rebecca sat down because her knees would not hold. Elias moved half a step, then stopped himself. He let her sit without making her weakness a scene. "I feel foolish," she said. Edith's voice came firm. "Do not. A liar used your hope against you. That is his shame, not yours." Rebecca looked at the land paper again. "I do not even know if this is still mine." "It may not be," Edith admitted. "But Walter thinks it matters. That is reason enough to be careful." Elias took his hat from the peg. "I'll ride down and speak to the postmaster." Rebecca stood quickly. "No." Both of them looked at her. The force of her own voice surprised her. She drew a breath and lowered it. "No, not tonight. If Walter is watching, he wants movement, he wants fear. Let him wonder what we know." Elias studied her with something like respect. "What do you want to do?" The question held no command, no assumption. No man deciding her trouble belonged to him now. Rebecca looked at the letter, then the land notice, then the dark window where the ridge waited beyond the glass. "I want to understand what my father left behind," she said. "And I want Walter Pike to learn that a woman can be humiliated in the street and still stand upright the next morning." Edith gave a small nod, as if that answer settled something important. "Come to the schoolhouse tomorrow," she said. "I have ledgers there from old town donations and county notices. Some names repeat when land is involved. We may find more." Elias spoke from near the door. "I will take her." Rebecca turned to him. "I can walk." "I know." That was all he said. And somehow it did not feel like doubt. It felt like a man offering his shoulder to the weather while still knowing she had legs of her own. Edith put her gloves back on. "Then I will expect you both after morning lessons." Elias reached for the door. Before he opened it, he stepped out first and looked into the dark. His body changed almost at once. Still alert. Rebecca noticed. "What is it?" she asked. He lifted one hand for quiet. The yard outside was black except for the thin porch light spilling from the cabin. Pine stood close and motionless. The mare was not in the lean-to. Juniper stood near the fence with her head high, ears pointed toward the lower trail. Elias stepped off the porch. Rebecca followed before Edith could stop her. Cold air struck her face. The mud sucked softly at her boots. Elias moved toward the fence and crouched. A strip of pale cloth was caught on a rough splinter of wood near the gate, fluttering faintly in the wind. He pulled it free. Rebecca knew the cloth before he handed it to her. Fine gray wool. The same shade as Walter Pike's coat. Edith whispered, "Lord help us." Rebecca looked beyond the fence, toward the dark trail winding down to Mercy Ridge. For the first time, fear did not make her want to shrink. It made her angry. Elias closed the gate and set the latch with quiet care. He came close, Rebecca said. Elias looked toward the trees, close enough to hear voices if the wind favored him. The letter in Rebecca's pocket suddenly felt heavy as a stone. Edith stepped nearer to the porch. You should come down to town with me tonight, both of you. It may be safer. Elias did not answer right away. Rebecca knew why. If they ran to town in fear, Walter would learn he had shaken them. If they stayed, they risked the dark and whatever waited inside it. Then a sound came from the pines. One sharp crack. A branch breaking under a boot. Elias moved in front of Rebecca before she could breathe. But this time, she did not let him stand there alone. She stepped to his side, clutching the strip of gray wool in her fist, staring into the darkness where a man had been listening. And from somewhere below the ridge, Walter Pike's voice called out through the trees. "Rebecca, we need to talk." Walter Pike's voice came through the trees like a hand reaching from the dark. Rebecca stood beside Elias at the fence, the strip of gray wool clenched in her fist. The cold air pressed against her face. Behind her, Edith Bell stood near the porch with one hand at her throat, the cabin lamp throwing a thin gold line across the mud. Elias did not move toward the voice. He did not call back. That silence made the darkness feel larger. Walter spoke again from below the pines. "I know you can hear me. I did not come to cause trouble." Rebecca's mouth tightened. A man who came honestly did not hide in trees after nightfall. He did not leave torn cloth on a fence. He did not listen at windows while a woman learned the shape of his lies. Elias' voice stayed low. "You do not have to answer him." "I know," Rebecca said. Her own calm surprised her. Maybe anger had steadied what shame had tried to break. Maybe the letter in her pocket had changed the ground beneath her feet. Yesterday she had been a rejected bride with no place to stand. Tonight she was a woman holding proof. Walter stepped into the weak wash of lamplight. His gray coat was torn at the lower sleeve. His hat sat low, and his face wore the careful sorrow of a man who had practiced in a mirror. He stopped on the far side of the fence and lifted both hands slightly, as if showing he meant no harm. "I only wanted a private word," he said. Elias answered first. "Private words come before public cruelty, not after." Walter's eyes flicked to him, then back to Rebecca. "This is between Miss Wren and me." "No," Rebecca said. The word cut cleaner than she expected. Walter paused. Rebecca stepped closer to the fence, though Elias shifted beside her, ready if needed. She did not look at him. If she leaned too much on his strength now, Walter would mistake decency for ownership. She wanted no confusion in the matter. "You made it between yourself and the whole town when you shamed me in the street," she said. "You made it between yourself and the law when you used my letters for something dishonest." Walter's expression changed for only a blink. There it was. Not guilt, not yet. Recognition. Then he smoothed it away. "I do not know what stories Mrs. Bell has brought up here," he said, glancing past Rebecca toward the porch, "but I came to apologize. That is all." Edith's voice came sharp from behind them. "Then apologize from where you stand and ride back down." Walter ignored her. "Rebecca," he said softly, "you were tired yesterday. So was I. A man can be disappointed and still regret his words." Rebecca took the opened letter from her pocket. The paper made a small sound in the wind. "You read this before I came." Walter's gaze dropped to it. "I received many letters," he said. "I cannot be expected to remember every line. But you remembered enough to insult me with the truth from it." A hard quiet followed. Elias' eyes remained on Walter, but Rebecca felt his attention on her too, not guiding her, not pressing, simply present. like a fire behind a closed stove door. Walter shifted his weight. If I read it, then yes, I knew some matters. I handled them poorly, but that does not change what was arranged. There is no arrangement. There can be. His voice warmed the way it likely had in his letters. I came back because I was wrong. I can admit that. We can still marry. I can give you a proper home, a name that will settle the talk, and protection from men who may not have your best interest in mind. His eyes moved to Elias when he said it. Rebecca almost laughed, but the sound would have had too much pain in it. Protection, she asked, from the man who picked up my bag when you left it in the dirt. Walter's jaw tightened. You do not know him. I know what he did when no reward was promised. And you know nothing else. Walter leaned closer to the fence. Ask the town about Elias Morgan's wife. Ask why no one goes up this ridge unless they must. Ask why a woman died here with no doctor at her bedside. The words struck the air hard. Behind Rebecca, Edith inhaled sharply. Elias did not react, and that stillness hurt more than anger would have. Rebecca turned her head just enough to see him. His face had gone quiet in a way that looked practiced, not empty but shut, like a door closed from the inside. Walter saw it, impressed. Did he tell you that part? Did he tell you he kept her up here through winter until fever took her? Did he tell you the whole town said pride killed her? That is enough, Elias said. His voice was not loud, but the fence between them suddenly felt thin. Walter smiled faintly. Truth troubles you. No, Elias said. Men using the dead to frighten the living trouble me. Rebecca looked at Walter, and whatever fear had stirred in her began to harden again. She had watched people use stories as weapons all her life. Her father's debts, her mother's illness, her own age, now Elias' grief. It was all the same kind of cruelty, wearing different coats. You came to warn me, she asked. I came to save you from making a foolish mistake. No, Rebecca said. You came because I found out there may be land tied to my name. For the first time, Walter Pike truly went still. The night around them seemed to listen. Edith stepped down from the porch. Careful, Mr. Pike. Walter's eyes sharpened. You have been busy. No, Rebecca said, you have. Walter looked back at her. The practiced sorrow faded now. Something colder took its place. You do not understand what you are holding, he said. Then explain it. That claim is old, tangled, and nearly worthless unless handled by someone who understands business. Your father made promises. Debts do not disappear because a daughter wishes them gone. Rebecca's hand tightened on the letter. My father's debts are not yours to collect. But his land may settle them. There it is, Edith said quietly. Walter's mouth shut. Elias stepped closer to the fence. Ride down. Walter ignored him again. Rebecca, listen to me. If you force this into court, you will lose what little dignity you have left. Lawyers cost money. Records vanish. Men sign papers they do not remember signing. A woman alone gets swallowed by the process. Rebecca felt the truth inside the threat. Not the legal truth, perhaps, but the frontier truth. Men like Walter knew which doors opened for them and which closed in a woman's face. For a moment the old fear returned. Then Elias spoke beside her. She is not alone. Rebecca looked at him. Walter laughed. Are you offering to fight her battles now? No, Elias said. I am offering to stand where I can be counted. Those words moved through Rebecca slowly. Not claiming, not rescuing, standing. There was a difference, and she felt it. She lifted the letter higher. Tomorrow I am going to the schoolhouse with Mrs. Bell. Then I will speak to the postmaster. Then I will ask the county clerk what remains of my father's claim. Walter's face darkened. You think this mountain hermit and a schoolteacher can protect you from what you do not know? Rebecca's voice trembled, but it did not break. "I think I have spent too long being afraid of men who count on silence." A gust of wind moved through the pines. Walter stared at her, as if she had become someone he had not planned for. Then he leaned closer, his voice dropping. "You will regret embarrassing me." Elias' hand closed around the top rail of the fence. The wood creaked under his grip. Rebecca saw the danger in that moment, not from Elias' temper but from Walter's purpose. He wanted a scene. He wanted Elias angry. He wanted a mountain man with a dark past to look like the threat. So Rebecca moved first. She stepped between Elias and the fence, not to protect Walter, but to protect the truth from being buried under another public story. "No," she said, "you do not get to write this scene either." Walter blinked. Rebecca pointed down the trail. "Leave." For several seconds, no one breathed. Then Walter took one slow step back from the fence. His eyes moved over all three of them. Edith by the porch, Elias at Rebecca's side, Rebecca standing with his torn cloth in one hand and her opened letter in the other. "You have been warned," he said. He turned and disappeared into the trees. They listened until the sound of his horse moved down the ridge and faded into the dark. Only then did Rebecca realize her hands were shaking. Edith came to her first and gently took the torn cloth from her fist. "You held yourself well." Rebecca let out a breath that nearly broke. "I did not feel well." Most courage does not feel like courage while it is happening. Elias remained by the fence, looking into the trees. Rebecca turned to him. "What he said about your wife." His shoulders tightened. "You do not owe me that story," she said. "Not before you are ready." He looked at her then. Something in his face shifted, small but deep, like snow loosening on a roof. "No one has ever said that part to me," he answered. The words were rough, almost too quiet to hear. Rebecca felt their weight. Behind them, the cabin lamp flickered in the wind that slipped through the open door. Edith wrapped her shawl tighter and looked from one to the other. If this moment made you feel that truth can still protect the wounded, stay with this story. Because some secrets are only beginning to rise. The next morning, Mercy Ridge would see Rebecca Wren walk back into town, not as a rejected bride, but as a woman carrying a letter that could ruin Walter Pike. But none of them knew that before sunrise, someone would break into the schoolhouse and steal the oldest county ledger from Edith Bell's desk. Before sunrise, Mercy Ridge was still half asleep when Edith Bell found the schoolhouse door standing open. A cold wind moved through the room, lifting the corners of copy papers on the children's desks. The little stove had gone dead in the night. A slate lay cracked near the front bench. Chalk dust marked the floor in pale smears, as if someone had searched in haste and cared nothing for what they ruined. Edith stood in the doorway with her shawl tight around her shoulders, staring at the damage. She did not scream. Women who lived long enough on the frontier often learned to spend their fear carefully. She stepped inside and went straight to the locked desk near the window. The drawer hung crooked, pried open with a blade. Inside were ink bottles, attendance papers, a bundle of spelling cards, and the place where the old county ledger should have been. It was gone. By the time Rebecca and Elias reached the schoolhouse after morning light, half the town had gathered in small knots along the street. No one spoke loudly. They did not need to. News traveled faster when carried in whispers. Rebecca saw the open door and felt the blood leave her face. Edith met them at the threshold. "He took it," she said. Elias looked past her into the room, only the ledger. "That and a packet of county notices my brother sent from Cheyenne." Rebecca gripped the edge of her shawl. "The papers about Willow Creek." Edith nodded. The words settled cold in Rebecca's stomach. Walter had not merely threatened her. He had moved before she could. He had known exactly where the trail of proof might lead, and now that trail had been cut. A few townspeople stood nearby, watching Rebecca with the old hunger for a story. Yesterday she had been pitied. Today she was becoming dangerous to talk about. A woman who brought trouble. A woman whose past had drawn a thief into the schoolhouse. A woman who had arrived in town and unsettled men who preferred things quiet. Rebecca felt their eyes. This time she did not lower hers. She stepped into the schoolhouse. The children's benches looked smaller in the cold light. A primer lay open on one desk, its page wrinkled by damp air. Near the stove, little Tommy Wilkes' slate had been crushed under someone's boot. Rebecca bent and picked it up. A child had written 3 sums on it in careful, uneven numbers. For some reason, that small broken slate hurt more than the stolen ledger. Walter had not only stolen from her. He had reached into a room where children learned their letters and left his selfishness on the floor. Elias crouched near the desk and studied the marks on the wood. Blade was narrow, he said, not an axe, not a pry bar. Edith's mouth tightened, a pocket knife. Maybe. He ran one finger along a muddy print near the window. He came through here. Rebecca looked toward the window. The latch hung loose. Outside, the ground was soft from rain. Elias went out without another word. Rebecca followed. Behind the schoolhouse, the mud held prints. Not many. A boot mark below the window, another near the corner. Then the tracks moved toward the alley between the church and the blacksmith shed, where wagon ruts confused the ground. Elias studied them carefully. Rebecca watched his face. Can you follow them? For a while. Edith came up behind them. Then do it. Elias looked at Rebecca. You should stay with Mrs. Bell. Rebecca's back stiffened. He saw it and corrected himself before the hurt could settle. Not because you cannot come, he said. Because if he wants those papers hidden, he may try to turn the town against you while I am gone. Someone needs to be here to speak plain. That was different. Rebecca drew in a slow breath. Then I will stay. Elias nodded once. If Pike comes near you, go where people can see. Edith gave a dry little sound. After today, I imagine half the town will be watching whether we ask them to or not. Elias started down the alley, moving with the quiet certainty of a man who knew how to read ground the way others read newsprint. Rebecca stood beside Edith and watched him go. The teacher's eyes stayed on the alley. That man has carried more blame than most would survive. Rebecca said nothing. Edith glanced at her. I was here when his wife died. Rebecca looked at her then. Walter used the ugliest version because ugly versions travel faster, Edith continued. But there was more to it. Rebecca's throat tightened. What happened? Edith folded her hands against the cold. Margaret Morgan took fever in a winter storm. Elias rode down for the doctor in snow deep enough to bury fence rails. The doctor would not climb back with him, said the trail would kill the horses and maybe all of them. Rebecca looked toward the ridge. Elias went back alone, Edith said. Tried to bring her down wrapped in quilts on a sled. She was too weak by then. The storm turned him around before he reached the lower road. Rebecca closed her eyes for a moment. She could see it too clearly. A man in white snow pulling Hope behind him until Hope became too heavy to move. Then why did the town blame him? She asked. Because guilt is easier to hand to someone standing nearby. Edith looked toward the schoolhouse. And because Elias did not defend himself, he buried her, paid the doctor anyway, and went back to the ridge. Rebecca understood that silence now in a new way. Elias had not become quiet because he had nothing to say. He had become quiet because speaking had not saved him. The bell above the schoolhouse door rang as wind moved it. Several townspeople turned. Walter Pike was walking down the boardwalk. He wore a dark coat this morning, not the torn gray one. His hat was clean. His face carried the grave concern of a man arriving late to sorrow he had helped create. Rebecca's hand tightened around the broken slate. Edith whispered, "Careful." Walter stopped near the schoolhouse steps and looked at the open door. "I heard there was trouble." No one answered. His eyes moved to Rebecca. "I hope no one was harmed." Rebecca held his gaze, only the truth. A few people shifted at that. Walter sighed, soft and patient. "Miss Wren, I understand you are upset with me, but accusing a man without proof will not bring back stolen papers." "I did not say your name." "No," he said, "but your meaning galloped ahead of you." The storekeeper, Amos Reed, stood outside his doorway, arms crossed. His wife watched from behind the window. The blacksmith had stepped out with a hammer still in his hand. Mercy Ridge had become a courtroom without benches. Walter knew it. That was why he had come. He turned slightly, letting his voice reach the street. "Yesterday I was accused of schemes over a land claim I have never seen. Now the schoolhouse is broken into, and I find myself measured by looks and whispers. Is that justice?" Rebecca felt heat rise in her chest. He was doing it again, setting the stage, choosing the angle, making himself the injured party before anyone could speak. But this time she had learned something. Do not let him write the scene. She stepped onto the schoolhouse porch, still holding Tommy's broken slate. "This room belongs to children," she said, her voice clear. "Whoever broke in did not only steal from me or Mrs. Bell. He broke their slates, stepped on their lessons, and took papers that might tell whether my father's land was stolen before I ever came here." Walter's face stayed calm, but his eyes sharpened. Rebecca turned to the people gathered near the street. "I am not asking anyone to hate Mr. Pike. I am asking something simpler. Ask why an old ledger frightened somebody enough to steal it." The blacksmith lowered his hammer. Mrs. Reed came out of the store slowly, wiping her hands on her apron. Walter gave a small, sad smile. "That sounds stirring, but stirring words are not proof." "No," Rebecca said, "they are not." She lifted the broken slate. "But broken things can still speak." She turned it over. On the back of the slate, pressed into the chalk dust by a muddy thumb, was the faint outline of a mark. A ring mark. Not a full print, not enough for a judge, but enough for a town that had seen Walter Pike's right hand resting on his vest every Sunday, wearing a square black onyx ring. A ring he was not wearing now. The street went silent. Walter looked at the slate. For one breath, his hand twitched toward his coat pocket. Rebecca saw it. So did Edith. So did Mrs. Reed. Walter's expression hardened just a little. "Many men wear rings." "Then you will not mind showing your hands," Edith said. A murmur moved through the crowd. Walter looked at her with sudden dislike. "I do mind being treated like a criminal by a schoolteacher and a mail-order bride who has brought nothing but scandal since she stepped off the coach." The words landed hard. Rebecca felt them, but they no longer owned her. Mrs. Reed stepped down from the boardwalk. "That is a cruel thing to say beside a broken school door." Walter turned on her. "Stay out of this, Martha." The moment he said it, he knew he had misstepped. Martha Reed's face changed. "Not much, but enough." "I will not," she said. "My boy sits at the second bench. His slate is in there too." More people moved closer now. Walter took one step back from the porch. "This town is making a mistake." From the alley, a horse snorted. Everyone turned. Elias Morgan came into view leading a sorrel horse by the reins. The horse's flank was streaked with mud, and tied behind the saddle was a leather packet wrapped in oilcloth. Walter's face went pale. Rebecca felt the world narrow to that packet. Elias stopped at the edge of the street. His coat was damp. Mud marked his knees. One hand held the reins. The other held a small square of black stone set in silver. Walter's missing ring. Elias looked at Rebecca first, as if giving the truth to her before he gave it to the town. "Found the horse in the old creek wash," he said. "Found this in the mud beside it." Walter's mouth opened, but no words came. Elias untied the oilcloth packet and handed it to Edith. She opened it with shaking hands. Inside lay the county notices. But the old ledger was not there. Only a single torn page remained, folded around something else. Rebecca took the page slowly. Her father's name was written across the top. Silas Wren. And beneath it, in faded ink, was a line that made her knees weaken. Transfer pending upon daughter's marriage signature. Rebecca looked up at Walter. The street around them vanished into a blur of faces, cold air, and held breath. Walter had not come to marry her because she was unwanted. He had come because without her, the land could not be taken. And somewhere, hidden by the man who had just lost his ring in the mud, the rest of the ledger still waited to be found. The page shook in Rebecca's hands. Not because of the wind. Because every word on it seemed to pull her life into a shape she had not known was waiting. Transfer pending upon daughter's marriage signature. Her father had not merely left behind a forgotten claim. He had left behind something locked to her name. Something Walter Pike had known about before she ever saw Mercy Ridge. Something important enough for him to write 6 kind letters, pay for a stagecoach passage, and then break into a schoolhouse when the truth began to rise. The street remained silent. Walter stood near the schoolhouse steps with his face pale and his empty right hand half closed. The black onyx ring rested in Elias Morgan's palm like a small dark eye. Rebecca looked from the ring to Walter. "You knew," she said. Walter's mouth worked once before sound came. "That page proves nothing except old county confusion." Elias' voice was low. "Then why was your horse in the creek wash?" Walter's eyes flashed. "Many men ride sorrels." "And many men lose rings besides stolen papers?" Edith Bell asked. A murmur moved through the crowd. Walter turned toward the people of Mercy Ridge, searching for the old shape of their obedience. He had always dressed well, spoken smoothly, bought rounds at the saloon, donated enough to the church roof to have his name mentioned at supper tables. Men like him counted on a town remembering their polish before their stains. But polish did not shine so well beside a broken schoolhouse door. Martha Reed stepped closer. "Where is the ledger, Mr. Pike?" Walter's jaw tightened. "I do not have it." "Then say where it is." "I said I do not have it." His voice rose on the last word. The whole street heard the crack in him. Rebecca folded the page slowly. Her mind was moving now, not fast but clear. Walter was afraid, not ashamed, not sorry, afraid. That meant the ledger was not destroyed. If it were gone forever, he would not be standing here sweating in the cold. "You hid it," she said. Walter looked at her sharply. "You hid the ledger because you still need something from it." She held up the torn page. "This is not enough by itself. You need the rest." Elias looked at her with quiet approval. Walter gave a bitter laugh. "Listen to yourself. Yesterday you arrived in this town with 1 carpetbag and no roof. Now you speak like a county judge because a mountain man and a schoolteacher filled your head." "No," Rebecca said. "I speak like a woman who has been lied to and has begun counting the lies." That struck harder than shouting would have. Edith turned to the crowd. "We need Sheriff Darden." A boy near the livery took off running before anyone told him twice. Walter stepped back. "You are all making a grave mistake." Elias moved 1 step forward, still holding the sorrel's reins. "Then stay and clear it." Walter's eyes moved toward the alley. Rebecca saw it. So did Elias. For 1/10 second, the street held still. Then Walter bolted. He did not run toward his horse because Elias held it. He lunged down the alley beside the blacksmith shed, coat flying open, boots sliding in the mud. Someone shouted. The blacksmith moved too late. A barrel tipped, sending water across the dirt. Elias started after him. Rebecca caught his sleeve. Not hard, just enough. He wants you chasing him alone. Elias stopped. Their eyes met. In his face, she saw the fight between instinct and judgment. The mountain man in him wanted to track the threat until it was caught. The wounded man in him knew too well how quickly a town could turn a necessary act into an ugly story. Then Sheriff Darden rounded the corner from the other end of the street, gray mustache sharp over a tired mouth, coat buttoned wrong from being fetched too quickly. What in thunder is happening now? Edith held up the packet. Burglary at the schoolhouse. Stolen county papers found with Mr. Pike's horse. He just ran. The sheriff looked down the alley where Walter had vanished. His hand moved to his belt, then stopped. Which way? The blacksmith pointed, behind the livery. Darden shouted for 2 men to circle around, then looked at Elias. Morgan, you know tracks better than any man here. Elias glanced at Rebecca. She let go of his sleeve. Go, she said quietly, but bring others with you. That single sentence changed everything. Elias was not the lone mountain man chasing a town gentleman into the back streets. He was a tracker assisting the sheriff in daylight, with witnesses. Darden nodded. You heard her, Amos Sila's with us. The men went. Rebecca stood on the schoolhouse porch as boots thundered down the alley. A few townspeople followed at a distance, hungry for the ending. Others remained near her, unsure what to do now that the story had grown larger than gossip. Martha Reed came up the steps and touched Rebecca's arm lightly. I am sorry, she said. Rebecca looked at her. For yesterday, Martha added, for watching and saying nothing. The apology was small, but it cost something. Rebecca could see that. She nodded, thank you. Martha swallowed. A town can be cowardly when one brave person would have been enough. Rebecca looked toward the alley where Elias had disappeared. Sometimes one person is enough to remind the others. Edith came to stand beside them, the recovered packet held tight under her arm. We must secure these before someone else decides to be clever. Together, they went back into the schoolhouse. The room looked worse in the full morning. Mud across the floor, desk drawer splintered, children's copybooks scattered like frightened birds. Rebecca set the torn ledger page on Edith's desk and smoothed it flat with both hands. The name Silas Wren stared up at her. For years, her father's name had been a burden, a shadow that entered rooms before she did. Now it had become a doorway, though she did not yet know whether it opened toward justice or more pain. Edith unlocked a metal box from beneath a loose floorboard near the stove. I keep examination papers here. No thief ever wants children's arithmetic. Rebecca almost smiled. They placed the torn page and county notices inside. Outside, the town had begun moving again, but every sound carried tension. Horses, men calling, the distant slam of a stable door. Somewhere a dog barked until someone told it quiet. Rebecca bent to gather the children's papers. Martha joined her. So did another woman from the millinery shop. Then the blacksmith's wife came in carrying a broom. One by one, the room filled with women who had watched yesterday and regretted it today. No one made a speech. They simply began setting things right. A bench was lifted back into place. Chalk was swept. Copybooks were stacked. Tommy Wilkes' broken slate was set aside, and Martha promised to bring him a new one from the store. Rebecca worked among them with a strange ache in her chest. This was not forgiveness exactly, not yet, but it was something. A town learning to be better after being worse. By noon, Sheriff Darden returned without Walter. Elias came with him. Mud streaked the hem of Elias' coat. A shallow cut marked his cheek where a branch had caught him. He looked tired, but his eyes found Rebecca the moment he stepped through the door. Walter had escaped. Rebecca knew before anyone said it. Darden removed his hat. He took a fresh horse from the south pasture and rode hard toward Broken Spur Canyon. We found tracks, lost them on stone. Edith's mouth tightened, and the ledger. The sheriff shook his head, not yet. Rebecca pressed a hand against the desk. Elias stepped forward. He did not carry much. If he stole the ledger, he hid it before he ran. Where? Martha asked. Elias looked toward the window, toward the ridge, toward the country beyond town. Somewhere he thought he could come back to. The words chilled Rebecca more than the wind. Sheriff Darden looked at her. Miss Wren, I need to ask if you will make a statement. I will. And you should know if that land claim is real, Pike may not be the only man involved. Transfers take signatures, witnesses, filings. Someone has been helping him. The room quieted. Rebecca looked at the metal box beneath the floorboard. Her father's name had pulled one thread, and now the whole cloth was starting to loosen. Who? She asked. Darden's eyes shifted, just briefly, toward the courthouse at the end of the street. That small glance said more than an answer. Elias saw it too. The sheriff lowered his voice. I have suspicions, not proof. Rebecca thought of Walter's confidence. Records vanish, he had said. Men sign papers they do not remember signing. A woman alone gets swallowed by the process. He had spoken like a man who knew the process from the inside. Edith closed the metal box. Then we gather proof. Darden nodded, carefully. Martha folded her arms, and until Pike is found. No one answered at once. Then Elias spoke. She stays where he cannot reach her easy. Rebecca turned to him. He had said it to the room, but his eyes came back to her, as if asking permission after the words had escaped. The old Rebecca might have bristled. She might have heard command where concern stood, but today she heard the difference. I will stay at the cabin, she said, but not as someone hidden. Elias nodded, no. I will teach Tuesday and Friday. I will give my statement. I will search what records I can. I know. There it was again. That simple faith. The kind that did not flatter or cage her. If you believe a woman can lose everything in public and still rise stronger than the people who shamed her, stay with Rebecca's story. The hardest truth has not reached the light yet. That evening, Elias walked beside Rebecca up the ridge. The sun was low and the valley carried long shadows. Neither of them spoke for the first half-mile. The day had been too full of voices, and silence felt like clean water. At last Rebecca said, You could have chased him faster alone. Yes. But you did not. No. Because I asked. Elias looked ahead at the trail. Because you were right. The answer settled softly between them. Near the cabin, juniper nickered from the fence. Smoke rose thin from the chimney, left from the banked fire. The place looked different to Rebecca now. Not safe exactly. Safety was too fragile a word for a world where men like Walter Pike rode free. But it looked like a place where truth could rest between battles. As they reached the porch, Elias stopped. Rebecca looked at him. What is it? He was staring at the door. A folded paper had been pinned to it with a small knife. Rebecca's breath caught. Elias pulled the knife free and took down the note. He unfolded it slowly, then handed it to her. Only 6 words were written inside. Ask Morgan what happened at Clearwater. Rebecca looked up at him. The color had gone from Elias' face. For the first time since she had met him, the silent mountain man looked afraid. The note trembled in Rebecca's hand. "Ask Morgan what happened at Clearwater." The words were short, but they changed the air around the cabin. The ridge, the pines, the porch, even the quiet mare at the fence seemed to draw back from them. Rebecca looked from the paper to Elias, and for the first time since he had stepped between her and Walter Pike, she saw something in him that was not strength, not patience, not guarded kindness. Fear. Not fear for himself. Fear of being known wrong. Elias took the note from her gently, as if it might burn her fingers if she held it too long. "Who is Clearwater?" Rebecca asked. He did not answer. The sun had fallen behind the far ridge, and the last light caught the cut on his cheek. A bead of blood had dried there, dark against his weathered skin. He looked older in that moment, not by years, but by burden. Rebecca waited. She had promised him he did not owe her his grief before he was ready, but Walter had dragged that grief to their door and pinned it there with a knife. Silence no longer protected Elias. It only gave Walter room to shape the story. At last, Elias folded the note once and held it in his fist. "Clearwater was not a person," he said. "It was a place." Rebecca stood very still. He turned from the door and looked toward the darkening trees. A mining camp east of here, hard country, bad water. Men went there chasing silver and found more trouble than silver. "What happened there?" Elias drew a slow breath. "I was there before I married Margaret." The name of his wife entered the evening softly, but it carried weight. Rebecca did not move closer. She wanted to, but she understood him enough now to know that some wounded things needed room before they would come into a hand. Elias looked down at the porch boards he had repaired days before. "I worked freight then. Hauled tools, flour, blasting powder, whatever camps paid for. One winter, a cave-in trapped 5 men below the North Cut. I was one of the men who went in after them." Rebecca's fingers tightened around her shawl. "We got 3 out," he said. 2 were already gone. One of them was Nathan Bell. Rebecca's eyes lifted. Bell. Edith's husband. The name struck her like cold water. Elias went on, his voice low and rough, as if each word had to be pulled from a deep place. "The tunnel was shifting, timbers cracking. I had Nathan by the arm. He was alive, hurt bad but alive. Then the roof gave." Rebecca felt the porch vanish beneath the story. She could hear it in her mind. Wood screaming under stone, men shouting in dust, a lantern shaking in the dark. "I had a choice," Elias said. "Hold on and die with him, or let go and pull the other man out." He looked at her then. "I let go." The words fell between them. No excuse followed, no plea, no careful shaping of himself into an innocent man, just the truth, plain and terrible. Rebecca's heart twisted. "And Edith knows." "Yes." "Does she blame you?" "For a while I thought she did." Elias looked toward town, though the valley was mostly shadow now. "Maybe she did at first. Grief needs somewhere to put its hands. But she came up 2 years later with a basket of bread and said Nathan would have cursed me for dying stupid when another man could still be saved." A sad breath moved through him. "I never knew if she meant it, or if she was just tired of hating me." Rebecca's voice softened. "Maybe both can be true." Elias looked back at her. The cabin behind them stood quiet, lamp unlit, door half open. The knife mark remained in the wood where Walter had pinned the note. Rebecca saw it and felt anger rise again. Walter had not chosen Clearwater by accident. He had found a story that carried old blood, old guilt, and old names. He had hoped Rebecca would look at Elias differently after hearing it. And she did. But not the way Walter wanted. She saw a man who had carried impossible choices and still stepped into the street for a stranger. A man blamed for one woman's death, haunted by another man's, and still careful enough to repair a loose porch board before someone fell. "Walter thinks this will turn me against you," she said. Elias' mouth hardened. "It might turn others." "It already did once, didn't it?" His silence answered. Rebecca looked toward the dark trail. "Then we do not let him tell it first." Elias frowned. "What are you saying?" "I am saying we go to Edith." "Tonight?" "Yes. He may be waiting somewhere between here and town." "Then we go careful." Elias shook his head. "Rebecca." There was warning in his voice, but also something more frightened than warning. He did not want his past carried into town again. He did not want Edith hurt. He did not want Rebecca standing in the smoke of a fire he believed belonged to him. She stepped closer. "Elias, he stole a ledger. He hid from the law. He pinned this to your door because he wants us afraid of shadows. If we stay quiet, he will use Clearwater, your wife, my father, anything he can touch. He will make every old wound into proof that we should not be trusted." His eyes searched hers. "And if they believe him?" Then they were waiting for permission. That landed hard. Elias looked away. Rebecca lowered her voice. "I know what it is to let shame speak first. I did it for years. I let people say my father's name like a stain, and I let myself walk smaller because of it. But yesterday in that street, you stood between me and a lie. Now let me stand beside you and do the same." For a long moment, Elias said nothing. Then he opened the cabin door, took the lantern from its hook, and lit it with steady hands. They did not take the main trail. Elias led Rebecca through a narrow path behind the cabin, down a slope thick with pine roots and wet leaves. The lantern's stage shuddered most of the way, giving only enough light to keep them from stumbling. Once, an owl broke from a branch overhead, and Rebecca's heart jumped into her throat. Elias stopped and listened until the woods settled again. He walked ahead, but not too far. Every few steps he looked back. Not because he doubted her. Because the dark was real. Near the lower road, they heard horses and crouched behind a stand of brush. Two riders passed slowly, shapes against the thin moonlight. One laughed under his breath. The other spat into the road. Rebecca could not see their faces. Elias' hand moved slightly, warning her to stay still. The riders continued toward the south pasture and vanished. "Walter's men," she whispered. "Maybe, or men paid not to ask why they are riding." They waited until the hoofbeats faded. By the time they reached Edith Bell's house behind the schoolhouse, the lamps in town were burning low. Edith opened the door with a shawl around her shoulders and a small pistol in her hand. When she saw them, her eyes narrowed. "Tell me." Elias held out the note. Edith read it once. Her face changed, but not with surprise, with pain remembered too quickly. "Come in," she said. The room smelled of tea, ink, and old books. A small fire burned in the stove. On the mantel sat a framed tintype of a man with kind eyes and a beard trimmed neater than most frontier men managed. Rebecca knew without asking that it was Nathan Bell. Elias removed his hat. Edith watched him for a long moment. "I wondered when Pike would dig that grave open." Elias' voice was rough. "I am sorry." "For what part?" "For bringing it back to your door." Edith set the note on the table. "You did not bring it. A coward did." The word hung there, clean and final. Elias looked at the tintype. "I let go of him." Edith's expression tightened, but she did not look away. "You saved Samuel Price." Rebecca listened. The name was new. Edith continued. "Samuel lived because you pulled him clear. He has 4 children now in Oregon. Nathan died because a mountain fell on him, Elias, not because your hand opened." Elias swallowed, and for one breath Rebecca thought he might break. He did not, but his eyes shone in the firelight. Edith moved to a writing desk and took out a small packet tied with faded blue string. Nathan wrote me before that last shift. He said the mine owners were cutting timber costs, said the north cut was unsafe, said if there was trouble, it would not be an accident. She placed the packet on the table. Rebecca's breath caught. Why did you keep this hidden? Because the mine closed after the cave-in, because Nathan was gone, because Elias had already been blamed and would not defend himself, because I was tired. Edith touched the letters. And because tired people sometimes let the wrong story live too long. Elias stared at the packet. This clears Clearwater. It tells the truth, Edith said. Truth does not always clear a man, but it gives decent people a chance to stop lying. Rebecca looked at the letters, then at the note Walter had left. A thought began to form. Walter knew about Clearwater, she said. He knew enough to use it. What if he also knew about the mine owners, about old filings, hidden claims, county records? Edith's face sharpened. Elias looked at her. You think the same men who buried Clearwater are helping him with Willow Creek? I think Walter knows which old sins are useful, Rebecca said, and he learned that from someone. A knock sounded at the back door. All three froze. Edith reached for the pistol again. Elias moved between the women and the door. The knock came once more, softer this time. Then a man's voice whispered, Mrs. Bell, it's Amos Reed. Please open. I know where Pike hid the ledger. Edith looked at Rebecca. Rebecca looked at Elias. The whole story seemed to lean toward that door. If this truth is pulling you in, stay close now. Because the past Elias buried and the land Rebecca never knew she owned are about to meet in the same dark place. Edith opened the door. Amos Reed, the storekeeper, stood outside with rain on his hat and terror in his eyes. Before anyone could speak, he held up a shaking hand stained with fresh ink. The ledger is in the old Clearwater Mine, he said, and if Pike reaches it first, none of you will live long enough to read it. Amos Reed stood in Edith Bell's back doorway, with rain running from the brim of his hat and fear sitting plain on his face. For a moment, no one moved. The little kitchen behind the schoolhouse felt too small for what he had just said. The stove ticked softly. The lamp flame bent when the cold draft came in around Amos's shoulders. On the table lay Walter's note, Nathan Bell's old letters, and the torn ledger page that had already changed Rebecca's life once. Now Amos had brought the rest of the truth to the door. Elias stepped toward him. Start from the beginning. Amos swallowed. He was not an old man, but fear had aged him in a single night. His apron was gone, his store coat buttoned crooked, and the ink on his fingers looked like he had tried and failed to wash away proof. I did not know what Pike meant to do to her, he said, looking at Rebecca. Not at first. Rebecca felt Edith's hand settle lightly near her elbow, not holding her back, only reminding her she was not standing alone. Amos went on. Walter came to me months ago asking if I still had old county copies from before the records moved to Cheyenne. My father kept everything. Tax notices, land lists, claim transfers. I told him there were boxes in the storeroom. I thought he wanted Creek rights. Willow Creek, Rebecca said. Amos nodded. And you helped him. His eyes dropped. I let him look. He paid me for the time. I did not ask enough questions. Elias' voice was hard. Men who take money not to ask questions usually know the answers are ugly. Amos flinched, but he did not deny it. He found the Wren claim, Amos said. Found the marriage condition. Your father had tied the final transfer to your signature before the land could be sold clean. It was meant to protect you, I think. If Silas died, no creditor could move it without you knowing. Rebecca's throat tightened. For years she had carried her father's name like a curse. Now she saw him differently, if only a little. A flawed man, yes. A debtor. A man who had failed her in many ways, but somewhere in the wreckage he had tried to leave one door locked against wolves. "And Walter wanted the key," she whispered. "You were the key," Amos said. The room went quiet. Elias' hand curled once, then opened. Rebecca kept her chin lifted. She would not let that sentence break her. Edith spoke next. "How does Clearwater fit?" Amos looked toward the table where Nathan Bell's letters lay. The old mine company bought land through false filings years ago. Some of the same men later handled water rights and abandoned claims. Judge Whitcomb's name appears in more than one place. Edith's face went pale with anger. "The judge?" Amos nodded. "Pike does errands for him, quiet ones. If the Wren claim transfers, Whitcomb gets a share through a holding company. Pike gets money, maybe land too." Rebecca thought of Walter in his fine coat, shaming her in the street so the town would see her as unwanted, weak, and grateful if he later returned. She thought of the schoolhouse drawer broken open, the stolen ledger, the note on Elias' door. It had never been only cruelty. It had been business. Cold, planned, smiling business. "Why hide the ledger in Clearwater?" Elias asked. Amos rubbed his ink-stained fingers together. "Because no one goes there, not after the cave-in, and because if anyone did follow Pike there, he could use the old story against you. Say you went back to destroy proof of what happened." Elias' face became stone. Rebecca turned to him. "That is why he left the note." "Yes," Elias said quietly. "He wanted the past waiting before we reached the mine." Amos stepped fully inside and shut the door behind him. "There is more. Pike came to the store after dark. He was angry, muddy, missing his ring. He said if anyone asked, I was to say he had been with me at the storeroom when the schoolhouse was broken into." Edith's eyes narrowed. "And you agreed?" "I was afraid." "Of Walter?" Amos looked toward the window, though the night outside showed only his own reflection. "Of Judge Whitcomb, of losing the store, of what men like that can do when they decide your name should be ruined." Rebecca understood that fear better than she wanted to. Still, understanding did not make it clean. "So why come now?" she asked. Amos looked at her then, and shame finally reached his eyes. "Because Martha asked me why my hands smelled of ledger ink. Because my son cried when he saw his broken slate. Because my wife said a man who lets children pay for his cowardice has already lost the store he was trying to protect." For the first time that night, Edith's face softened a little. Elias took his hat from the chair. "We ride now." Rebecca stepped forward. "I am coming." "No," Amos said quickly. "You cannot. Pike has men watching the south road. If he sees you coming, he may burn the ledger or worse." Rebecca looked at him steadily. "That ledger carries my father's name." "And mine," Edith said, touching Nathan's letters. "If Clearwater is part of this, I go too." Elias turned. "Both of you staying here would be wiser." "Wiser for whom?" Rebecca asked. His jaw tightened. She stepped closer, lowering her voice so only he could feel the full weight of it. "You told me once not to stand in a storm just to prove rain is wet. I heard you. Now hear me. This is not me proving courage. This is my life being written by men who never asked my permission." Elias held her gaze. The old fear moved behind his eyes. Fear of failing another woman on a dangerous road. Fear of bringing someone into a place already marked by death. Fear that if the mountain took from him again, he would not survive what remained. Rebecca saw all of it. "I am not Margaret," she said softly. The name hurt him, but he did not turn away. "I know," he answered. "I am not asking you to save me." "I know that too." "Then let me stand where I can be counted." Those were his own words, returned to him. For a long breath, Elias said nothing. Then he nodded once. Edith took Nathan's letters and tucked them inside her coat. Amos said he would take them by the back road, past the old churchyard and across the creek ford, where trees would hide the lantern if they kept it low. Sheriff Darden was out searching the southern trail, and there was no time to fetch him without risking the ledger. They left Mercy Ridge without waking the town. Rain thinned to mist as they rode. Rebecca sat behind Elias on Juniper, one hand holding the back of his coat, the other pressed against the pocket where her father's torn ledger page rested. Edith rode Amos's mule with the grim balance of a woman who had spent years teaching children not to fear hard seats. Amos led the way, shoulders hunched, glancing back too often. The road to Clearwater climbed through black timber. No one spoke much. Once in a narrow pass, Elias raised a hand and they stopped. Far below, two lanterns moved along the main road, slow and searching. Walter's men. They waited behind wet pine branches while the lights drifted past. Rebecca could feel Elias breathing in front of her, slow and controlled. His nearness should have embarrassed her, but it did not. In the dark, with danger moving below, his back felt like the side of a mountain. When they moved again, the trees began to thin. Clearwater appeared under a broken moon. The old mining camp sat in a hollow of stone and dead timber. A few cabins leaned inward as if tired of standing. Rusted wheels and cracked beams lay half buried in weeds. The mine entrance opened in the hillside like a black mouth, boarded long ago, though several planks had been pulled loose. Edith made a sound so soft Rebecca almost missed it. Elias dismounted and helped Rebecca down. His hand stayed only long enough for her boots to find the ground. Amos pointed toward the mine. There is a side chamber inside, old powder room. Pike said the ledger would stay dry there. Elias looked at him. You have been inside. Years ago. And the supports. Amos looked away. Bad. Elias' mouth hardened. Rebecca looked at the entrance. Every instinct in her wanted to step back. The darkness there did not feel empty. It felt remembered. Men had died in that hill. Nathan Bell. Others. A part of Elias too, perhaps, though his body had walked out. Edith moved beside him. I have not stood here since they brought Nathan down, she said. Elias took off his hat. You do not have to go in. Yes, she said, I do. There was no arguing with that. They tied the animals behind one of the leaning cabins. Elias lit one lantern and kept the flame low. He took a coil of rope from Juniper's saddle and handed one end to Amos. You stay at the entrance, Elias said. If the ground shifts, you pull twice and shout. Amos looked relieved and ashamed of the relief. Rebecca took the second lantern. Elias looked at her. Stay behind me, step where I step. If I say stop, stop. I will. He studied her face, then nodded. They entered the mine. The air changed at once. Cold, wet, close. The lantern light touched old beams, damp stone, and rusted rails half sunk in mud. Water dripped somewhere ahead. Each drop sounded too loud. Rebecca's skirt brushed the wall and dust clung to the hem. Behind her, Edith breathed slowly, one hand on the letters inside her coat. Elias moved like a man, walking through a memory he had tried to bury alive. At the first split, he stopped. This way, he said, before Amos could call from behind. Rebecca realized he knew the place. Not from maps, not from stories. From nightmares. They moved deeper. A timber groaned overhead. Rebecca froze. Elias lifted one hand. Wait. Dust slipped down in a thin veil, then the mine settled. They continued. At last the tunnel opened into a low side chamber. Old powder shelves lined one wall. A broken crate sat in the corner. On top of it lay an oilcloth bundle. Rebecca's heart leapt. Elias crossed the chamber carefully and lifted the bundle. He opened it. Inside was the missing ledger. Edith covered her mouth with one trembling hand. Rebecca stepped closer, light shaking over the pages as Elias turned them. There were names, signatures, transfers, water rights, and folded notes tucked between pages. Silas Wren's claim appeared near the middle, marked in red pencil. Beside it were two newer names: Walter Pike, Judge Horace Whitcomb. Rebecca's breath broke. "We have it," Edith whispered. Then a voice came from the tunnel behind them. "No," Walter Pike said, "you have found it for me." He stood at the chamber entrance with a pistol in his hand, but it was pointed low, not at them. Walter was too careful for open violence if a quieter threat would do. Behind him stood a thin man in a dark coat, older, clean-shaven, with cold eyes Rebecca knew at once from the courthouse wall. "Judge Whitcomb." The judge looked at Elias and smiled faintly. "Mr. Morgan, back at Clearwater, how fitting." Elias stepped in front of Rebecca and Edith. Walter's eyes moved to the ledger, hand it over. Rebecca's fingers tightened around the lantern. The mine gave another long groan overhead. Dust fell between them like gray snow. Elias looked up once, then back at Walter. "You fire that pistol in here," he said, "and this whole place may come down." Judge Whitcomb's smile faded. Walter's hand shook. Rebecca looked at the rotting beams above them and understood the terrible truth. The ledger was in their hands. The villains were finally in front of them. And the mountain was deciding whether any of them would leave Clearwater alive. Walter Pike's pistol looked small against the darkness of Clearwater Mine, but in that low chamber, with rotten beams above and buried grief in every stone, it held the whole world still. Rebecca stood behind Elias Morgan with the lantern trembling in her hand. The missing ledger lay open against Elias' arm, its pages filled with names that had been hidden too long. Silas Wren, Walter Pike, Judge Horace Whitcomb, transfers, water rights, old signatures, and the proof that her life had been hunted before she even knew there was something to steal. Edith Bell stood at Rebecca's side, pale but steady, one hand pressed over the letters from her dead husband. Walter's eyes stayed fixed on the ledger. "Hand it over, Morgan." Elias did not move. "No." Judge Whitcomb stepped farther into the chamber, careful where he placed his polished boots. Even in a dying mine, he looked like a man who expected the world to make room for him. "Do not be foolish," the judge said. "That book is county property." Edith's voice cut through the damp air. "Then it belongs in the county office, not hidden in a mine by thieves." Whitcomb's cold eyes moved to her. "Mrs. Bell, grief has made you bold." "No," Edith said. "Grief made me tired, truth made me bold." A timber cracked above them. Everyone froze. Dust sifted down onto Walter's sleeve. His pistol hand jerked upward, then lowered again when Elias looked at him. "I told you," Elias said, "one shot could bring the roof down." Walter swallowed, but anger kept him standing. "Then give me the ledger and no shot is needed." Rebecca stepped out from behind Elias. He shifted as if to stop her, but she touched his sleeve once. A small touch, enough to tell him she knew what she was doing, even if her heart beat hard enough to hurt. Walter saw her and smiled with thin relief. He thought fear would bring her back into the shape he had first chosen for her. "Rebecca," he said softly, "you do not understand men like the judge. You can still walk away from this. Marry me, sign what needs signing, and I will make sure you are kept comfortable." The word comfortable sounded ugly in that place. Rebecca looked at him and finally saw the whole man clearly, not the letter writer, not the public groom, not even the thief, just a coward who had mistaken a woman's loneliness for weakness. "You humiliated me because you thought I had nowhere else to go," she said. Walter's smile faded. "You stole from a schoolhouse because you thought children's things did not matter. You used Elias' grief because you thought a wounded man would stay silent. You used my father's name because you thought shame would keep me from looking closer. Her hand moved to the torn ledger page in her pocket. You were wrong every time. Judge Whitcomb's mouth tightened. Enough of this. He reached inside his coat. Elias moved fast. Not toward Walter, toward the judge. He struck Whitcomb's wrist before the older man could pull out the folded papers hidden there. The judge staggered back into a support beam. The old wood groaned. Walter raised the pistol in panic. "Do not," Edith shouted. The gun fired. The sound exploded through the mine. For half a second there was only ringing. Then the roof answered. A deep crack rolled above them like thunder trapped under earth. Stones shifted. Dust burst from the ceiling. Rebecca coughed and stumbled. Elias caught her with one arm and pulled her back as a beam split near the chamber mouth. Walter screamed, not from pain but fear. "Move," Elias shouted. The chamber began to break. Elias thrust the ledger into Rebecca's arms. "Hold it under your coat." She obeyed without thinking, pressing the heavy book against her chest beneath her shawl. Edith grabbed Nathan's letters from the table just as a shelf collapsed behind her. Judge Whitcomb slipped in the mud and clawed at the wall, his fine coat streaked with clay. Walter backed toward the tunnel, waving the smoking pistol, though he no longer seemed to know where he pointed it. Elias turned to him. "Drop it, Pike." Walter did not. Another stone fell between them. The lantern in Rebecca's hand went out. Darkness swallowed the chamber. Edith cried out. Rebecca felt for her and found her sleeve. Elias' voice came through the black, steady and fierce. "Everyone down, follow my voice." The mine cracked again. A thin gray glow appeared ahead where the main tunnel bent, light from the entrance far away. Elias moved toward it, one hand on the wall, guiding them by memory. Rebecca followed with the ledger against her heart. Edith followed Rebecca. Behind them, Judge Whitcomb cursed and scraped to his feet. Walter's voice shook in the dark. "Wait for me." No one answered at first. Then Elias stopped. Rebecca felt him stop more than saw it. Walter had used Elias' dead wife, Nathan Bell, Clearwater, and every old grief he could find. He had tried to destroy Rebecca. He had threatened them all. And still Elias turned back toward his voice. Rebecca understood then what kind of man he truly was. Not gentle because life had spared him. Gentle because it had not. "Give me your hand," Elias called. Walter coughed in the dust. "I cannot see." "Then listen." A beam fell somewhere behind them, sending a wave of dirt across the tunnel. Edith clung to Rebecca's arm. The glow ahead seemed to shrink. Rebecca called out too. "Walter, come toward Elias' voice." For a second, only the mine answered. Then Walter stumbled into view, one hand scraping the wall, the pistol gone. His face was gray with dust, eyes wide like a frightened boy's. Elias caught his coat and shoved him forward. "Run!" They ran. The last stretch of tunnel seemed longer than the whole road from Missouri. Rebecca's lungs burned. The ledger felt heavier with every step. Edith stumbled once and Rebecca pulled her up. Elias came behind them with Walter and the judge, driving them forward while the mountain shook. At the entrance, Amos Reed was shouting their names. Rebecca burst into cold night air and fell to her knees in wet grass. Edith came out beside her, clutching Nathan's letters. Walter stumbled after them and collapsed near a broken cart. Judge Whitcomb staggered out last, one sleeve torn, his dignity left somewhere underground. Elias came out just as the entrance gave a final, terrible groan. The old timbers folded inward. The mouth of Clearwater Mine vanished behind a fall of stone and dust. For a long moment, no one spoke. Rain fell softly over the ruined camp. Then Sheriff Darden stepped from the trees, with 2 armed men behind him. Amos let out a shaking breath. "I found them on the road and brought them." Darden looked at the collapsed mine, then at Walter, then at the judge. Walter tried to stand. "Sheriff, these people stole county property." Rebecca rose slowly. Mud stained her dress. Dust streaked her face. Her hands shook, but she held the ledger out with both arms as if carrying something sacred. "No," she said, "we found what you stole." Sheriff Darden took the book. Edith handed over Nathan's letters too. "And these show Clearwater was unsafe before the cave-in. Men knew, men profited, men lied." Judge Whitcomb's face went hard. "Those are private papers." Darden opened the ledger and looked at the names. His expression changed page by page. "Not anymore," he said. Walter sank back against the cartwheel. By dawn, Mercy Ridge knew. The sheriff brought Walter Pike and Judge Whitcomb into town under guard, not with ropes or spectacle, but with the quiet weight of truth walking in daylight. The ledger was placed before witnesses at the church hall because no one trusted the courthouse that morning. Edith read Nathan's letters aloud with a voice that shook only once. Amos Reed confessed what he had done and what he had feared. Martha stood beside him, not excusing him, but making sure he did not turn away before the last word was spoken. Rebecca stood near the front with the torn page in her hand. The land at Willow Creek was hers. Not as a prize, not as a fairy tale ending, as a final gift from a flawed father who had tried, in one small legal line, to keep something safe for his daughter. Walter had wanted her signature. He left Mercy Ridge with none of it. Judge Whitcomb lost his bench before the month was out. Men from Cheyenne came for the records. More names were uncovered. Old wrongs did not all become right overnight because life rarely works so neatly. But the lies lost their shelter, and that was where justice began. As for Clearwater, the town changed the story. No one said anymore that Elias Morgan had let a man die. They said he had gone into a collapsing mine twice in one lifetime and come out both times carrying someone who could not save themselves. They said Nathan Bell had warned the camp. They said Margaret Morgan's death had been grief, not guilt. And slowly, not all at once, Elias' name stopped being spoken like a question. Winter came early that year. Snow touched the North Ridge before Thanksgiving. The cabin roof no longer leaked. Elias had patched it properly before the first freeze, though Rebecca still kept the old kettle near the wall for a week just to make him raise one eyebrow at it. She kept teaching at the schoolhouse 2 mornings a week. The children loved her because she listened before correcting them. Tommy Wilkes got a new slate, and on the first day he used it, he wrote her name in crooked letters and asked if it looked right. "It does," Rebecca told him. "Names matter." Willow Creek waited until spring. There would be papers, repairs, choices, and hard work. Rebecca did not yet know whether she would sell it, farm it, or build something there with her own hands. But for the first time, the choice was hers. One evening, after snow had turned the pines silver, Elias brought an old guitar onto the porch. Rebecca had never heard him play before. She stood in the doorway with a shawl around her shoulders while he sat on the step, his rough hands moving gently over the strings. The song was low and plain, not cheerful, but full of a kind of peace that had survived sorrow. "What is it?" she asked. "My father's song," he said. "Margaret liked it." Rebecca came and sat beside him. Not behind him, not in the doorway. Beside him. The valley below was dark, but the cabin window glowed behind them. Juniper shifted in the lean-to. Smoke rose straight into the cold sky. For a long while, neither of them spoke. Then Elias said, "You still planning to leave for Willow Creek come spring?" Rebecca looked out over the ridge. "I am planning to go see it," she said. "That is different." He nodded, but his fingers stilled on the strings. She turned to him. "And when I go, I may need someone who knows how to fix a roof, read tracks, and make terrible coffee." The quiet after that was soft. Elias looked at her, and the guarded places in his face seemed to loosen. "I can do all three," he said. "Yes," Rebecca answered, "I know." He reached into his coat pocket and took out something small. Not a ring. Not yet. Just the blue ribbon that had fallen from her hat the day she arrived. He had found it caught on the stage road and kept it folded safe. "I thought you might want this back," he said. Rebecca took it with tears in her eyes. That little ribbon had left Missouri with a woman hoping a stranger might choose her. Now it rested in the hands of a woman who had learned to choose herself first. She tied it around the neck of Elias' guitar. A small thing. A soft thing. A sign that the past could be remembered without being allowed to rule the room. If this story touched your heart, subscribe for more emotional Wild West stories where wounded people find courage, truth, and a place to call home. When the song began again, it moved out over the snowy ridge, down toward Mercy Ridge, and into the wide dark valley beyond. Rebecca Wren had arrived in town as a woman rejected in public. But she did not remain the woman Walter Pike tried to shame. She became the woman who uncovered the truth, saved a good man's name, and walked into winter with her head high. And beside her, Elias Morgan played softly into the cold night, no longer alone beneath the mountain sky.